This podcast has been brought to you by our Patreon account. After almost 4 years of producing free content in one way or another, we're finally opening up the doors for people to financially support us. For anyone out there that supports what we're doing, believes in us, believes in what we're trying to achieve, feel free to head over to patreon.com/XY Advisor. And second of all, we've finally converted our mainly dormant website into a membership site now. It is focused on training. You pay $49 a month. You get one credit to spend on the library of different training courses, and those training courses are constantly getting upgraded and constantly getting added to. We actually give half the money to the course providers because we value what they do. It's just a really good way for us to improve upon the financial advice community. So that's everything. Enjoy the podcast.
This session is also brought to you by Sunsuper. They're one of the fastest growing profit for members or industry funds in Australia. They were the very first of these funds to partner with advisors, and they've got functionality where you can actually link to your client's Sunsuper accounts and charge advice fees through the fund, as well as a number of tech innovations to make it easier for you to work with your clients. They've got great investments. They're really, really cheap. And their team are just generally legends. So if you haven't already connected with Sunsuper, give them a shout because they're doing some really cool stuff. So I hear that I need to ask you about the time that you took 9 friends sailing in Croatia.
Yes, you do. Is that where you want to start?
Tell us. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
In my wisdom, I decided it'd be a really good idea to go sailing in Croatia, which doesn't sound so unusual because I actually grew up sailing, so I sort of knew what I was doing. But I ended up going and doing my navigation skills course in London. I was living in London at the time, and I picked... there were 9 in total friends to go, and I picked them very carefully because I know you can get into a whole lot of not so good places when you go sailing. What I had failed to do in my preparations was learn Croatian, because when I got there, I couldn't understand the maps, I couldn't understand the skeds, I couldn't understand the locals, and it was the end of season, and there was a lot of problems with the boat, and the boat kept conking out, and we had to sail into anchor and caught the entire bay's they're just sitting there sipping their wine at the end of the day, and we're going aground. Eventually we pulled it out and we managed to get the boat anchored, but it was a harrowing experience.
Oh, you beached yourself
in
the boat?
Almost, yeah. We came off, but I think what was really interesting for me from the point of view is that I picked the people really carefully, so I think there's a lot of analogies there around picking the right team around you, and I also had the right people on the right job. So much to my girl power problem, I actually sent all the girls down below and I just had the guys on deck because I needed their strength and their height to be able to get the sails down and lose the wind really, really quickly. So, yes, not one of my brighter times.
So good team management.
Good team management.
Yeah.
Yes. One of the guys on the boat had a cigarette for the first time in his life.
There you go. So we're talking people today. So tell me firstly, what are the biggest mistakes that people make with people?
Yeah, the biggest mistakes is 3 things. If business owners could just do 3 things better, they'd have a lift in their productivity and their profitability, which is hire well, manage well, and fire well. That really, it is as simple as getting really good at that stuff. But I think as a general comment, most people have never been taught how to be a great people manager. If you ask people, did you learn that at uni? Or, what did you learn about people management skills? They've got zero. And obviously they get promoted to that role of manager, and then we give them a technical component of their role, which takes up 95%. And we leave 5% for the management side of it, which, it should be sort of like 60 or 70% as management. The rest of it's technical if you want to get the most productivity out of the people in your team. So I think that's one of the biggest mistakes. And people don't know how to hire well. They don't know how to do great interviews. And they bring people in on the gut. And the gut tells them to hire, and then they end up with all sorts of mistakes. And then we end up coming in and doing the other part of it, which is the firing part.
Right. So how do people avoid the mistakes? How do you learn these things?
I think you need to educate yourself. And I think a great way to start to educate yourself is read my book, which is called From Hire to Fire and Everything in Between. I deliberately wrote it to become a dog-eared companion for business owners to go, I need to have one of those tough conversations. Let's turn to page 106 or whatever it is. And I think
Can you just bookmark it and leave it on their table?
Oh, no.
Just be like, reading before our next meeting.
Yes, it's a little preparation for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think you get better at it. Try and pick a mentor, somebody who you look up to, who you think is a really good manager, to try and help you and test your ideas out. So if you've got to have one of those awkward conversations or you're not sure how to manage something, you can run it by them first and they can give you some good coaching and mentoring. I think that's really important.
So are you saying that even people like Clayton Daniel could become a good manager over time?
Yes, of course.
I think you're totally overestimating the power of your book.
Look,
there is very little hope.
Look, I think, a big part of it that we joke about it, but it is desire. If you are a manager of people, you actually need to like people and you actually need to want to get the best out of them.
but we don't even, sometimes we start a business not even knowing that we'll have one employee, let alone 5, 10, 15 employees over time. So we don't even have a chance to practice the skills before we're actually in the job of managing people.
Yeah, when we were off air, we were talking before, didn't we? I have a client that you may actually know. And she said, Natasha, running a business would be so much fun if I didn't have to have employees.
Totally
agreed.
Yeah, and everyone feels like that because it's not necessarily, you went into business because you're a financial planner and you love numbers and you love creating wealth. That's why you went into business. The byproduct is most businesses to grow need people. And then you sort of go, I've got to do that bit of it.
Literally, the only thing that solves that problem is if you meet someone called Emily Blanche, who is the full-time staff here at XY Advisor, and she's an absolute killer. Like, I can't even underestimate or overestimate how good she is. But besides that, I've had appalling experiences with hiring and firing. In fact, I just did it the other day.
Which one?
I had to fire someone. Yeah. And it was so bad. It was so bad.
It generally doesn't leave a good taste in your mouth. And I think what we find is that the reason why you want to exit someone from your business is really valid. And if we walk down the street and use the reasonableness test, would most people say, yeah, that guy's got to go or that girl's got to go, they're not cutting it. The issue for small business is that it's quite a complex process to let somebody go, and they'll generally fail the unfair dismissal test. Now, the unfair dismissal test says, was the termination harsh, unjust or unreasonable? And there's a whole lot of things you need to do to try and make sure that you're not doing a termination in that way. One example is providing a support person. So if you've got to have one of those yucky conversations, you need to say to that individual, we need to have a difficult conversation. Do you want to bring someone in to support you? Now, if you don't,
who are they?
It could be
can I go down the street, or I've got to wait for their mum to come in?
You got to wait till their mum comes in.
Okay.
And if mum's not available today, you need to feasibly reschedule that meeting.
Okay.
Now, the reason for that is
someone had to bring their mum into a meeting.
Yeah.
There's a good reason they're getting fired.
Imagine you then, not only are you firing them, then you're embarrassing them in front of their mum as well. That's really tough.
That's so awkward.
Mum, I got fired and you were there. What?
And you saw it. Look, I think the reason for it is that many people have been fired very appallingly in the past. And the reason why they do that is often when you're in that situation, you're stressed, you're not listening, your mind's churning, you're thinking you're out of a job, and therefore you're not hearing what's being said to you. So that support person is there to say, well, remember when Ben said this, I think that's what he meant by that. Or they're not there to argue the point for you, they're there to provide emotional support to the individual who's going through it. So it might be mum.
And so, with the hiring, you talked about the importance of getting that right. What do you think, like, for if you think about financial advice businesses, and I think it's probably fair to say that at least, maybe I'm just sort of pushing out how I feel about things, but a lot of financial advisors, they're really good at what they do. Like you say, they're technical. They like working with people, but not necessarily managing people. What's the best approach for financial advisors to grow their business?
To hire the best?
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of things. One is that the old traditional sourcing strategy of Seek is still valid, but it's not as good as what it was. So what we've seen is a massive shift in the market. In the good old days, you could put an ad in Seek and you would get 100 responses, of which 20 could do the job standing on their head. So it didn't matter which one took it as long as one of them did. You put that same ad out now, you'll get 20 responses, of which 2 can do the job.
Really? Why?
There's my personal opinion on this is that for you guys are probably too young, but there used to be something called the training guarantee levy, which said that all businesses had to spend 1% of their payroll on training. Now, yes, there were jollies it was a Keating initiative. There were jollies to Bali, but what really came about as a part of that was that people were actually trained in their jobs. And then we hit the global financial crisis, so people lost their jobs. Training went first, then people lost their jobs, then it took a while for them to get back into the market, and things have been tight ever since. So there's two markets. There's the passive candidate, they're the ones who are actively looking, the financial advisors who are actively looking. And then there's the active candidates are the ones that are looking, and then you have the passive candidates. They're the ones that if you tap them on the shoulder, they go, actually, I'd be interested in having a chat. Don't forget, people are quite nervous about moving at the moment. There's sort of a mentality of better the devil you know out there. And so I think use multiple sourcing channels, do great interviews. So minimum of 2 interviews for all you guys. One is going to focus on the technical, can they do the job? But most people think, I need 100%. You don't. Try and hire for about 60 to 70% of the technical, teach the rest. Because otherwise, if you're hiring at 100, they're going to be bored and out the door if you haven't got a career progression for them.
And expensive. And
then we talked about what some of the costs are. The second thing is do a behavioural interview. Behavioural interviews are past behaviour indicates future performance. So if you know in your business that there are going to be times in the financial year you're going to put them under an enormous amount of pressure, they're going to have to get a whole lot of client stuff done, design a question around that. So tell me about a time when you had more work than you could possibly handle. What happened and what did you do? And you get them to give you a brief overview or synopsis, and then you pick a key event. So it might be in that meeting, what were you thinking going into that meeting? What did you say? What did you do? What was your role? Can you give me an example? Can you see if somebody answered all those questions, behaviours start popping out, and you can start to say quick study or bias for action or attention to detail.
Don't people just lie though
Not when you do that well.
Right.
If you what I've found in the past is that if they try to generically answer that question, you know they're lying.
Yeah.
So if someone can actually come up with a specific example of this was the client, this was the angry phone call, this is what I did, this is how I spoke to her, and this was the outcome, and it's a true example, you know they're lying. If they go, what I'd probably do is call the client, then call the advisor and try to make the client happy, they're making it up.
Yeah.
It should feel like specifics. They should be able to tell you what the story is.
Yeah, it should feel like you're a fly on the wall watching it play out. That's how, when it's done well. The last one is you need to do a cultural interview. Guess what? We run our own businesses. We get to decide the culture of our business. And the quickest way for someone to fail in a business is then they're a cultural mismatch. So questions like, tell me about the favourite place to work you've worked. Why was it your favourite? Tell me about your favourite boss. What is important to you when you go to work? Is it a place that gives back? Is it a place that, is all about results? So that you start to see, is there a match or is there going to be a disconnect here?
When Ben and I decided to work together, one of the things that we came up with was tests on how good each other's personality was. So I would just stalk around from time to time and completely unsolicited would shoot him with a paintball. And just find out how he felt about that. Or at least that may not have actually happened, but I'm sure you felt like it was happening from time to time. It was quite funny. First sort of 18 months that we were doing XY, it was Ben and I were pretty much just constantly at each other. But it's calmed down mostly now. Thankfully, it's Adrian that gets most of Ben's disdain, which is great that the focus is off me now.
We figured out that Clay is abrupt and can't manage anyone, so we stopped asking him questions or listening to his responses. But he recently took a test and figured out that if he's in a room with 100 people, he is the least polite person in that room. He's the 0th percentile. So that made me feel slightly better that it's like picking on a disabled person. So we won't do that.
So Clayton can be our non-performing employee.
Exactly.
And so hypothetically, if he was our non-performing employee, what do we do?
Let's do a case study.
Let's do a case study. Well, the first thing is to have a conversation, and this is what we call the informal part of the process. And people need to get better at giving feedback, and people generally aren't very good at it. They don't don't like having that conversation, and you need to get better at listening. So I'd be calling Clayton in and saying, look,
Okay, I got to get comfortable for this.
Performance review.
I've been fired before. I know how this
You've
goes.
never been fired during a podcast, though.
No, I haven't. Okay.
I used to be known as the angel of death. That's
Oh
probably
my
not a good
God.
thing. I'd let go about 50 people in London. Not good.
Which company
George
was this
Clooney,
for?
No, I'm not saying. Professional services company. Anyway, so you need to be able to say to them, when you do this, this is the reaction. Can you tell me why that's happening?
Okay.
And listen. And use things like mirroring. So, explain that to me in a little bit more detail. Or can I just check that I can understand you? Because potentially you're not performing because we haven't actually given you the tools or the resources or the time to do your job. So that's what we call an informal discussion. If it keeps going and it's not improving, then you're probably more into that stage where you might need to say to them, look, we need to have a serious chat with you. You might like to bring a support person on because...
My mum.
Bring your mum. and the conversation would go in a similar way, but you need to start documenting. And I would have even put a file note when you had that first conversation to say...
Is there protections for small businesses?
Yes, there are. Yeah. So this is the protection, and everyone who's listening, write this down because it's a really important number. If you have under 15 employees, an employee can't take you for unfair dismissal if they have less than 12 months service.
Oh.
If you have 15 or over, they can take you after 12 months service. So 6 months for under 15, 12 months for 15 and over. Now, what does that mean? If you are taken, so what would happen if you had a complaint raised against you is the first thing you'll hear from is the Fair Work Ombudsman. You have to fill about 8 pages of paperwork and attend a mediation. And that will take a couple of hours and they'll try and resolve the situation. If you're deemed to have failed that unfair dismissal test, you can be fined up to 6 months' salary to be paid to that individual.
Whoa.
And or reinstatement.
You guys better watch out.
You wouldn't really want to be reinstated, though, Clayton.
No. But guess what?
Don't accept that one.
They will push it if they're near 45 or over 45 and the relationship is not too badly damaged, because obviously once you're over 45 it can be harder to find a job. So they may push for that reinstatement.
The ombudsman may push for reinstatement.
Could you imagine?
God, that sounds horrendous.
It's like people want to get divorced and then the judge going, no, just suck it up.
Exactly.
So even though we're protected, there's still likely lots of costs associated with doing that if we do it the wrong way.
If you do it the wrong way, yes, because that I haven't included your time costs in that. We've developed an unfair dismissal calculator on our website to try and get businesses, give them an idea of what it will cost them if it goes wrong, and depending on how far through the process they go, so they actually get it right first go. They get some advice, they document it properly. And the other thing I would say is it should never come as a shock to Clayton when he's actually fired. So in the second last meeting, I will say to him, if your performance does not improve, your role is at risk of termination. So that when he turns up next time, yes, it could have all been improved and he's got to the levels of performance we need, or he knows he's probably coming in and, it should never be a shock.
Ben and I used to work at a place, and I was living under the threat of firing for, about 6 months. And for the first few months, Ben walked in, he was like, hey, guys, look, let me give Clayton, I'll bring him under my wing, I'll look after him, just give me a couple of months, and I'll sort him out. A couple of months later, he's like, yeah, I've given up. There's only so much a man can do.
He was really bad.
and you just, history repeats itself.
And you're still mates of sorts.
Yes. Yeah, we're business partners now. Now we work together, but no one's allowed to tell anyone else what to do. So we just don't listen to Clay. Let him create things. He's not non-performing. He performs, just not in conversations and instructions.
So I think you raise a really good point around trying to understand fit. So we talked earlier about Harrison's assessment. So you'll be familiar with psychometrics like DISC or Myers-Briggs. You're also familiar with wealth dynamics. That has its place as well. Yeah. So DISC, Myers-Briggs, extrovert, introvert, you probably worked out which one I am. What I love about Harrison's is they've mapped 6,500 jobs worldwide. And it will say, is Natasha a fit to be a HR manager? Yes, she's a 75% fit. But then it goes one step further. It lists all of my traits in terms of mandatory, desirable and nice to have for that role. So, when you work with someone after a while and you work out maybe great attention to detail or great client service, you work that out over time of working with them. Usually takes a couple of months. With this, you actually know how to point them to their strengths from day one. And it's a really powerful tool.
There's a company called Hatch. They're a startup, and it examines someone's social media, exposure or life or data or whatever. It comes up with a personality profile, and then when the employer, they do a bunch of tests and they put their culture in, and then this company called Hatch says whether or not they would be a good cultural fit. That's crazy, hey.
And it's becoming more and more of our social media life and what we see. Quick war story on this. A couple of years ago, we were hiring for a corporate travel company, and it was a fellow, and he was great. On paper, he was fantastic, but he was going to work with 6 women in an office and an MD male. And so what did the women do when the MD came out of the interview? They Facebook stalked him.
Yep.
And unfortunately, he'd had a whole lot of very inappropriate conversations about female genitalia and did not realise his profile was public. And so we actually had to rescind the offer because he was going to be working for a very high-profile person that you guys would know. And we couldn't risk that person finding out about that. And we couldn't have him in the office because the women were like, oh, we don't want anyone who speaks like that. And so he lost it. And he was mortified when we rang to say we've had to rescind. And I think he learnt a very important lesson about social media. And it doesn't go away. What you post, it's there for life. Especially young kids that are coming through now. They need to be really careful that they don't have the drunk photo because people look at that.
I think we have to be careful as well because there are a lot of John Smiths. Like I've heard more stories of people Googling their employee that was going to come in for the interview, and then when they walk in the door, they're the different person. Yeah. And so they've already got this idea that I'm going to meet this person, interview them, and I've got a negative feeling about it because I've looked at their social media, but then they've looked at the wrong social media.
Exactly.
And you're looking at the wrong person, but you don't know that till you get into the room with the person.
And then you've got that, unconscious bias.
You've got the unconscious bias from day one. But I'm a fan of the falling into the psychometric testing world. It just works, and I think that it's really important to build that into part of the hiring process because not only does it tell you if it's a good hire, but the outputs from whatever tool you use helps you manage that person going forward. You understand if they're a morning person or a night person or they're detailed orientated, and you can work to those strengths over time, and otherwise you just don't know it, or you've got to learn the hard way.
Yeah.
What do you use?
We use one called Peoplelogica.
Peoplelogica.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think the point is it's one data point, and you should have lots of data points when you're interviewing. To your point earlier about how do you make sure you hire the best. Great interview technique, great interviews, reference checks, background checks. We haven't gone there yet. Psychometrics, reference checks. You must reference check because people always say to me, "Well, they're just going to give me their mates' names." Well, they will if you let them. As you go through the interview, say, "Well, when you worked for ABC company, who did you report into and what was their role?" And you do that for each of the roles down. And then if you get to the bottom of the CV and it's George Smith and you haven't heard anything about George, well, who's George? So you need to get smarter about who you're doing reference checking with. And unfortunately on the social media side, the law has not caught up with it yet, in terms of people using social media to make a decision on hiring.
Oh,
are you allowed
or
to?
discriminating.
You're allowed to?
Well, technically at the moment you can, unless it's not an obviously discriminated, unless they could run an argument. It's discrimination.
So technically what you're suggesting could happen in the future is that gentleman that you were mentioning who had an abysmal social media profile, he could at some point turn around and say, I've been disadvantaged because of social media.
Or the other side of it is you as an employer, and that's the thing, the blurring of the lines between what's social and what's business. Let's all think about it. My Facebook started as a personal thing. It's now a business tool.
Yeah, totally.
So it's my friends that see what I did with my kids on the weekend, but it's also my business colleagues that see what I did with the kids on the weekend. Yeah. So there's a real blurring of the lines there, and that's making it complicated. So, employers are checking people's social media, but is that fair? What's the boundary between the work life and the personal life?
You are allowed to have an opinion, and that opinion, just because you have a different point of view outside of the workplace doesn't mean the workplace has the right to consider that opinion for hiring or firing people.
Unless it dishes the business publicly, then you're in slander territory.
And so just going back to with the hiring, you're talking about that profile that you use. Is that something, do you use that with everyone? Would you say that? And I know that you're familiar with the wealth dynamics as well. Is that already covered in the other profile that you mentioned, and is that important?
So in my business, I do wealth dynamics as well as Harrison's. So wealth dynamics gives you a more of a personality profile and approach. So we were joking before about you potentially being a creator.
Yes.
Do you remember what you were?
Yeah, I'm the first one that they mentioned.
Right up at the top, creator, and then star. Have you got star on?
No, I'm not. I don't have the star material at all. The creator though, I was like on the edge.
So your big picture.
Definitely.
Yeah, don't like, so yeah. So I'm a star creator, and then I'm married to, and my GM and some of my top team members are all lords. So lord profiles in our wealth dynamics are attention to detail, don't like change. Settle down, Natasha. Don't go too fast. Where I'm a bit more prolific rather than perfect, let's just go for it.
Yeah.
So that's wealth dynamics. Harrison's is more the match to the job. So I think they both have a place.
Right.
And again, it's another data point. In terms of how we use it, what we noticed was we used to not use it in our recruitment process, our recruitment package, and then we'd say, oh, would you like to do a psychometric test now? And they're like, no, I've already paid my money, I'm done. So then we included it in the profile, in the package, so that when they pick their best candidate, we'd say, right now we're going to do the profile on them. What that's done is lift the success, because you've got people who don't know what they're doing interviewing, lift the success of those recruitment pieces, and the anecdotal information, the 2 times people said they've failed the test, and they go, don't worry, we're going to take them on anyway. Didn't work out.
Right.
Yeah, the test works.
Cool. Okay. So what do you think for if I look at, say, my business or a small financial planning business, if you want to grow, or that you need to grow in terms of your people, what do you think is the best approach to that? Do you need to sort of look way down the track and say, this is what I want my business to look like, and start sort of building that out now? Or do you just solve for, because it's easy to obviously to solve for the biggest problem at the time? What do you think?
I think you do need to do both. You need to solve the problem now and get the resources. You need to make sure that they're effective, though. Most people put someone in a seat and expect them to learn by osmosis. And, they don't invest the time in the onboarding. They don't invest the time in you training them up, because you're so, busy and your head's spinning. You just go, there's your desk, go for it. And that doesn't set them up for success. And people are at the greatest risk of resigning in the first 3 months that they've joined. That's a really expensive time for them to resign, especially if they're good. So, but also to your point, you need to have an org chart of your vision. What's your business going to look like in 12 months if everything comes off? And also that helps with the recruiting process, because they're actually, hey, Ben's thinking what the business looks like in 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And I can see there's a career path for me if I hang around. So it's both.
And so, but what happens with most, especially solo businesses, like I know I did this when I started my business, it was just me, and then you just do everything as a financial advisor. So, and then you have to push to grow the business, and then like you pay for a staff member, it's a significant cost. So you push until wait until the final possible moment, and then you go, okay, now I'm going to spend the money and get someone. But in that moment, you've put yourself in a position where you're extremely busy, and then it's extremely difficult to spend that time with the training and the onboarding.
To be fair, you have a bit of a track record with that. Just dipping back into when Ben and I used to work together again. My very first day, Ben literally, and I love telling this story because it actually happened. He got a manila folder and just came and dumped it on my desk and goes, get that done, and then walks off again. I'm like,
I wasn't a manager. I was an analyst.
I was like, what am I?
But he was lower on the picking order, wasn't he?
There's a manager for that.
And you had it done by 5.
Absolutely.
Yeah. As you needed to.
That's management material there.
Look, I think there's a whole lot of things in that space. I think, set them up for success, do a great orientation, do check-in calls. So most people sit at their desk and they finish day 1 and everyone's like, oh, you coming back tomorrow? And that's sort of the extent of it. Why don't we sit down and have a conversation? What surprised you? What did you learn about the business today that you didn't know? What are we doing that you think we could be doing better? Don't forget, these guys have got insights. So do a great job description. Most people don't bother with job descriptions. But if I don't communicate to you what your job is, how you're supposed to be successful. And more so, if we don't know what everyone's doing, how do we know that all the pieces in the puzzle actually going to give us the outcome we want?
So do you, with the resourcing thing though, what do you do when you don't have the time? You just have to hire before you.
So I think everyone goes straight away, I've got to hire a full-time permanent employee. You don't. So what I would caution everyone with, and I'll say this up front, is I would caution everyone against hiring independent contractors or get some very good legal advice. And the reason why I say that is they're a really high-risk instrument to hire. Fair Work don't like them, and nor do the ATO. And there's two reasons for that. Fair Work don't like them because they think you are trying to avoid paying minimum entitlements like long service annual leave and all that sort of stuff. But even with super, with independent contractors, got to pay super now. The other reason is that ATO don't like them because guess what? They pay tax in arrears. They want pay-as-you-go people.
I see.
So they've made it incredibly hard. So a lot of people have old misconceptions about 80-20 rule and all this sort of stuff. It is very hard to have a true independent contractor in a business. But look at things like casual employees. That, you know, most of the modern awards allow you to have a casual employee to pay. You've got to check your award, but for 12 months. You know, so you can have somebody on board casually. You don't know what the ebbs and flows of the business are. Think about someone permanent part-time or someone on a fixed-term contract. So you could say, come in for 3 months. I think I've got 3 months. I think I can fund you for 3 months. Then we'll see, and we'll either negotiate an open-ended contract or another fixed term. So there's other ways of doing it rather than jumping straight into permanent full-time.
I see. And so once you get the person in, you find the right person and take all of those steps, what do you think are the best ways to keep your staff motivated?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of engagement. So engagement is the measure of discretionary effort. So what will keep you working in the office at 11 o'clock at night because there's a client deadline, not because you're getting paid overtime, but because
Threat of being fired.
it might be.
Not at all.
It might be. What would keep you there? So the statistics are, and there was a lot of research done out of, I think it was Harvard, that said businesses that score 75% and above for their engagement average across the business, in comparison to businesses that are in the lowest percentile, the 25th percentile and under, get 21% more productivity, 20% more profitability.
Ooh.
So most people would want a bit of that. So how do you build that engagement? Number one is communication. Who of your listeners has a communication strategy about how you're going to communicate with your employees?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Most wouldn't.
Not me.
So, you know, think about what people...
Talk to them.
Yes.
So I just bring my soapbox in and stand. And
Yeah.
Hear you.
Here it is. Get back to work.
So think about what they want to hear, how frequently they want to hear, and what are the channels for that. So one of the tools I use, I have a virtual team of 12. We use Voxer. And Voxer is like a walkie-talkie app. And so when I'm out and about on the road, I can just go, hi guys, this is where we're at. We've built this. We've just won 3 new clients. And a shout out to Helen because she's just doing an amazing job. And it takes me 2 or 3 minutes, and it's a free app. And literally people are working, but they're hearing what's going on in the business, and that keeps them interested and engaged. Then more broadly, you need to have regular catch-ups with your team quarterly. Take a half day, do some training, do some knowledge sharing, have a long lunch. I've just written a blog for Flying Solo going, we need to bring back the long lunch for clients.
I've kept it going.
What about like Tim Tams in the kitchen?
That can be it, you know, if that's what people want, do it. You know, ask
Do
them.
you know what
Dean
they
wants
Yeah.
the $3 solution.
You can tell he's got some
Like,
stuff.
how many?
Is it Tim Tams or a Monte Carlo?
Yeah. No, I know someone who quit because they cut the Tim Tams during the GFC.
Yeah, and look, there are people like
And
that.
the fruit.
And I think to your
Oh,
point,
yeah.
Ben, ask them. So one of the things that you guys could do is what we call stay interviews. So they're not exit interviews. It's an interview once every 6 months that says, what do you love about what you're doing? What is really hacking you off? What would make you stay here in 12 months? What would make you stay here in 3 years? Actually ask them. And they'll tell you in the most, and then, because it's different for everyone. If we asked everyone around this table at the moment, what's going to keep you doing your job for another 6 months or 6 years? It's going to be very different. So you need to tailor that. Salary is just one component. And interestingly, the number one attractor for people at the moment, candidates, is flexibility. Salary is 7 on the scale these days. So yes, it's important, and yes, it needs to have met the minimum legal requirements, but
Yeah.
people want to be able to work from home. They want to go and see the kids at the cross-country carnival. They want to have gone out late partying and know that that they're going to work on the weekend and catch it up. You just need to flex depending on who's in the
And I think
in the environment.
That's kind of useful for a small business because we don't always have the ability to pay higher than average market rates to attract the best staff. And so if we can add these extra things around the outside that sometimes are effectively free, but you get a very big return on flexible working, for example, they're the important things to actually build into the, I suppose, like the job offer. We're going to pay you X, but in addition to that, this is what we provide.
Yeah. I think one of the things I'd encourage your listeners to do is to tap into what I call a gold mine of talent, which is actually females who have left the workplace, because the larger end of town they talk about flexibility, but they're not all really doing it.
Oh, this is the young mothers.
The young mums. And do you know what? They are so grateful for a job.
I've heard a
and
lot.
you often have an overqualified person who's actually more than happy because they've got flexibility.
Yeah.
And so you get somebody who's a great resource in your
How
business.
do you find that person?
So I would, LinkedIn would be a great start,
LinkedIn.
some Facebook groups, or go into a mothers group on, in Northern Beaches or wherever you happen to be. But good people know good people. Mothers group,
Could you just
yeah.
imagine, if like Ben Nash tries to apply to the young mothers group, they're like, no, mate, no, not with that beard.
Maybe not the right one that I was thinking about then, but anyway. They're out there.
I've heard a really strange recruitment process. I think it's Zappos, the shoe store.
Oh, yes.
Where once someone comes on after a month, they offer 2 or 3 months' salary to leave.
Yes.
And then wait for the response. So, yeah. So
It's
only the good-
really innovative. And guess what? If people stay, they are well and truly committed.
Yeah.
The people that were potentially hiring mishires go out the door really quickly because they can take their cash and run.
It's self-selection at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was reading your business Employee Matters. I read online that you have hired, fired, and managed over 15,000 people. Is that right?
Yeah. If you think about all the years I've worked, and often I was in corporate roles, so I was a HR manager for 500 people. So it adds up over time. And
Are you still counting?
I've given up counting now. And do you know what? To be honest, I
Will you
don't
put
do
the
the
number
work
up?
anymore. Yeah.
There's a little counter it goes up
exactly.
on that.
Yeah. My team do the work now. I just talk about it.
Michael Clayton, that movie, I believe, and he flies around and fires people.
Oh yeah, up in the air, George
Up in the
Clooney.
air, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Did you ever a gun for hire like that?
Yeah, it's. I watched that movie. I had a lot of people say, "Have you seen that movie?" And I saw it very late in the process, but it did feel like that. But I think it's interesting. You can fire well, and you should fire well. People need to learn how to have this skill because, as a small business owner, you can't afford. If you've got 6 in your team, you can't afford 2 of them to be non-performers. That massively impacts your productivity.
Or one.
Even one.
Yeah.
One's 20%.
Exactly.
And a detractor often as well, right? So it drags it down. So it's 25-30%.
Exactly. And everyone else in the team's going, oh, God.
Yeah.
What about George? I'm carrying George's load again. And, and so as soon as you get rid of them off, and your team are like, look, thank God, why didn't you do that years ago?
Ben's been saying that about Paddy for 4 years now.
Maybe we might need to get you in. Bring the briefcase next time.
Yes.
So what can go wrong? Like, how does alcohol play a role in the workplace? Both, I think Aaron has put the beers in the fridge at our office, and so what's the things that can go wrong when maybe alcohol's involved in your workplace?
A couple of things. You need a drug and alcohol policy in this day and age. That's the first thing. The second thing you need to do is appropriate workplace behaviour training. I love a drink, so I'm not the fun police in, there are some businesses and industries that should be alcohol free. There are others where it's part of it and it's social, but it is an extension of the workplace. So even if you go out for drinks with a lot of people from work, that is deemed to be an extension of the workplace, and all the same behaviour requirements
even if you're
are
not
there.
paying for drinks?
Yeah, potentially.
That could have been an interesting thing for one of our previous employers.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Goodness. Yeah, definitely. And what happens if no one from, let's say the boss doesn't go, but say 4 or 5.
Still could be an extension. So an example I'll give you is I went away to a work conference, and I left early. I was a mother of 3 young kids, and my dancing days were sort of limited. And then one of the team that were there were over 100 people there. I don't know what happened, but he lost the plot and he ended up running around the room and he bit his boss on the cheek. He stuck his tongue down someone else's throat. He threw a girl on the floor and gyrated on her. Mass destruction.
Whoa.
Mass destruction. So I woke up the next morning and said, I think we need to have a talk about someone's behaviour. And obviously we went through a whole investigation and we had to interview people about the experience and so on. And he was fired. And the reason for that was that there was, a real concern for some people for safety, after that.
Surprised.
And whilst he was mortified, the reality was that he did it. And it couldn't. The business and he couldn't recover from that relationship. So, do appropriate workplace behaviour training. Teach people what bullying is, what it isn't, what sexual harassment is, what it isn't, what performance management is, and that will help lower your risk exposure. So, if you've trained everyone and everyone's signed off a piece of paper that says I've been to training and I've understood and I agree to abide by, then if somebody in your team does something wrong, they'll go after that individual, not you as a business. Because you as a business owner have a duty of care to provide a safe place of work. Every business owner does. And that's managing stress, that's managing opportunity for sexual harassment. The other tip, we talked about it before, the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement is going to increase, is my view, and it's going to increase the awareness and the acceptance of sexual harassment in the workplace. And I would suggest to you guys that we are just seeing the absolute tip of the iceberg. So there will be an increase in cases because people feel that it's now an appropriate time to bring forward a case. So you need to, if something happens like that, you need to get some advice pretty quickly and start to manage it.
So, my wife. How do I stop this from happening
With your wife?
in the home office, or potentially relax the policies?
Yes, I think there's a special circumstance there. I work with my husband too, and he gets hot in the summer, takes his shirt off. I'm like, come on, it's sexual harassment.
Well, let's hear a bit. Like, what is that an example?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question. I think it comes down to harassment that is that is not warranted. So, in terms of, I would suggest that, if you avoid touching people if you can. I'm a touchy-feely person. I just gave Ben a cuddle when I walked in because I've met Ben a few times. But I think your preference is to pull back and just be really careful because what one person is comfortable with, another person won't. We had a situation with a client a little while ago where there's some people, secretary working, and all the guys were commenting on her outfit. Now, the test I would have used is, would that fellow have made the same comment about her outfit if his wife was standing there? Do you get what I mean by that?
Ooh, like the wife test.
Yeah.
That's good.
Almost like a wife test, because I am not sure they would have made that comment. And so, and I think women have for a long time just laughed it off. And they're going to start pushing back, I think, a little bit more than what they have. So, appropriate jokes, you need to be careful about the content in jokes. I would avoid touching people unnecessarily unless they're comfortable. We had another client the other day that had a staff member send herself selfies of her naked.
Herself?
Sorry. I said that wrong.
Yeah.
She took photos of herself naked and sent them to her boss. And
accidentally?
No, deliberately.
Okay.
And he didn't know what to do with them, but he then engaged in a bit of conversation, and that hasn't ended well because she's now claiming sexual harassment.
What?
Yes.
That doesn't
So
seem to make
it's
sense.
a messy area.
Wow.
I think I want it is a messy area.
That's a minefield.
So you definitely, as a boss, you almost need a support person to talk through as these things are happening.
What do you do? Like, what should have that guy done?
Look, he should have said that sending me photos like that is inappropriate. Now, and then just killed it.
Right.
You can't take it back. He's seen it, but I'm really sorry. I can't engage in that sort of behaviour.
That makes it difficult, I suppose, for the workplace relations.
Exactly, because she may choose to leave after that, and if that's the case, maybe that's the right outcome.
Yeah, it's difficult.
But he put himself in a predicament by
not addressing
it.
Okay. Guilty by lack of reaction.
Yeah.
Although he did react, but in an inappropriate way.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And so your business, Employee Matters, obviously you know a lot about people. What is it that you guys do?
Yeah, so essentially we help businesses achieve success through their people. So we help them hire, manage and exit better. I'm a huge believer in your employees are your greatest asset. They're also potentially your greatest liability. We're all about building, at the center of what we do is building treasure, and that's that we hire people that treasure your business as much as you do, but also that you build a treasure trove in your business. And we do that through a number of different ways, but essentially we build highly engaged, highly motivated and very productive teams for businesses.
So do you sort of get into the nitty gritty of the architecture of the culture?
Yes.
Help codify that in some way and help communicate that?
Yes, I think culture is really important, and it can be a major attractor to work for you. So I think business owners need to get very clear about what's their employee value proposition when they're meeting with new employees or potential employees. Working here, this is what it's like to work for us. You know, and so that they're bought into that culture piece really early on. Because if you're a startup and you're hardcore and you're working, you know, long hours and stuff like that, and somebody's at the end of their career potentially and not interested in that anymore, it's not going to be a fit.
Correct. Yeah. And so how your business is a bit of a behemoth. You said you're working with your husband, you got 12 virtual staff. Obviously it's very successful. How have you gone about building your business? How did that all progress?
Yeah, I was lucky in the sense I think I learnt corporate best practice and now I apply in a way that makes commercial sense to small business. Having said that, Ben, I've made an incredible amount of mistakes along the way for the same reasons that your people do. I'm a HR person. I'm not a marketing, legal, social media. That's all the stuff you got to learn as you go. But I do think, you know, we work in a very there's a very extensive employee relations framework in place here, and people need to get their head around that, and they need to understand their modern award and their fair work obligations. But in terms of how I've built the business, it's trial and error. I've surrounded myself with great people, though. I have an incredible team that, you know, I was chatting about it when we were off air. My daughter had a bad accident and I was out for 4 days, and the team just pick up and they just run with it. And I had no worries that the business was not going to thrive while I wasn't there. And it's because of the people I've got there.
And so how did you go about growing your team?
Yeah, I tapped into that gold mine of talent, which is those mums who have had very successful corporate careers but don't want to work a 60-hour week anymore. And so we've built a portfolio of clients for them when they come in and out of that client's business as their HR manager. And it's so seamless that people actually feel like that's their HR manager. It's, you know, XYZ's HR manager. It's not, you know, employee matters person. And, you know, a big part of what we do is put the costs, which is important for you guys because they're all financial advisors. You know, a lot of times people think there's a lot of soft and fluffy with HR. I'm all about there's actually a lot of cost involved, and we can show you how we can save you a significant amount of money, particularly around breach fines and also, you know, getting a highly productive workforce or not having somebody's role vacant for too long, because that's very costly as well.
I've heard just simply paying someone to go is like a really good strategy. And
that you can do that in Australia. It's called a deed of release. And you have a conversation and you so it's mutual. You have what we call a mutual separation conversation, and it's under a without prejudice conversation. So we'll say, this is without prejudice, this is really not working for me. We could go down the performance management route. That'll take us a couple of months and you might end up performing. Or we can cut our losses and I'm going to pay you $2,000 and you go away quietly and you can't sue me, sign here. And they need to get legal advice on that deed of release. But it's a quicker, more expensive, but a quicker way and sometimes a better way to solve a problem.
Yeah.
I've seen that. I've seen that used in practice. In fact, I've had that used on.
Well, when I say I got fired, that's actually what happened.
Sign a deed in the past.
Like we can, we'll pay you. We'll pay you your bonus, and we'll call it a this release payment. But you have to sign this thing to say that you won't.
And that's an interesting thing. If you flip it around and think about the employees side, all of our clients, vast majority are employees, and they're who looks after them.
Well, you know,
Besides, obviously, the Fair Work.
the Fair Work does,
It's meant to protect the employees.
It is meant to protect the employees, and let's not forget that, you know, Fair Work is very much pro the employee and not the employer. And, you know, I would suggest that their HR managers should be protecting them in their businesses. But if they've got an unscrupulous boss, then, you know, they may need to take some advice from Fair Work, which is 131394, I think is the number.
And so if an employee has an issue, just randomly, they're able to call Fair Work and say,
and get
this
some
is
advice.
my situation.
But I would always go and speak to your boss first, because they may not be aware that it's an error or that it's making a mistake, and they might be very happy to make good on it. So, and I know we were talking, you were talking before about restraint of trade.
Yeah, well, that's another thing for financial planners as well. And, you know, lots of people get a contract that is 10 pages or 15 pages. And then I've seen the restraint of trades that say you can't operate in Australia. And if that fails, you can't operate in New South Wales. And if that fails, you can't operate in Sydney. And if that fails, you can't operate in Martin Place. And it's this cascading if formula to try to protect the employer. But then just in the industry, it seems like you can't enforce a restraint of trade very well, or it's very expensive.
It is.
And the onus is all, once again, on the employer, because the employee needs to eat his lunch. So they're entitled to go and work. And so what do you think about
So I think in the
restraining
past,
trade?
you're absolutely right. Restraint of trades weren't really worth the paper that they were written on, and you'd sort of put it in there and really just cross your fingers and hope that they believed it and they wouldn't do anything about it. Nowadays, there is actually a push, and the judges or the commissioners are making more orders to protect the business's IP confidentiality. So if you have an employee that sticks a USB stick and downloads all of your clients and takes them, that should be in your contract. That's not good, and you should be able to protect that as a business owner. Equally, around restraint of trade for your employees, it needs to be fair and reasonable. They've still got to earn a living. You know, I grew up in the banking and finance industry in dealing rooms, and they did it well, and it worked because they put people on gardening leave, and they were out of the market, but they were paid for 3 months. They couldn't do any work, and the hope was that they would lose all of their contacts and their beer buddies over that time, and then that would protect them. But I would suggest get a good one written, but it needs to be reasonable. But I would also encourage everyone here, if you haven't had your employment contracts looked at in the last 2 to 3 years, get them looked at, because the law is evolving over all the time. So we used to do employment contracts, and we don't do them anymore. And, you know, the iterations that I've seen coming through our lawyers that do them, massive changes and big changes around protecting your IP, protecting your confidentiality.
And you would actually say at an annual review, get your employees to sign a new contract?
Possibly not in an annual. It could be timed around your annual review, because what you might want to do is say, look, we're reviewing our contracts because we want to make sure that we're up to date with best practice. We're going to give you a chance to review the contract. You can take that off and show your lawyer. We're going to do info sessions about what's changed. And, you know, for anyone who signs up on this new contract, there's a little sweetener in it for you.
And so if they say no,
then they remain on the older contract, potentially.
Right.
So you can't force people to sort of upgrade their contract.
It's hard. And look, but what you want to make it is it's worthwhile to upgrade it. So you might want to put something else, an extra benefit in there that would be helpful.
So that's. I was going to ask you. My final question is around what do you see as the top 3 things that that people that run businesses, business owners, that they don't know that they should? So
the top 3 things is modern award. So you must be compliant with your modern award. So I think for you guys, it's probably the Banking and Finance Award. Maybe. There used to be 1,300 of them. There's now 132.
It'll be in the show notes.
It will be in the show notes. So do a link to that.
Whatever the award is.
We'll do a link to it. You must have a copy of that in the office. Your team must know where that is. So if the Fair Work Ombudsman walks in the door and says, "Who's the boss?" and Ben stands up, they go, "All right, where's the modern award?"
Isn't it on the internet?
It needs to be your, it needs to be,
That's
it needs to be in your office, whether it's in your kitchen or whatever. The other one is they don't send out the Fair Work info statement, which is legally has to go out with every employment contract for a permanent. And each of those 2 things that I've just mentioned expose you to a breach of the Fair Work Act, which could be up to $63,000, and they've just increased those to $630,000 for extreme cases.
Oh, you
Thanks
mean the
to
award?
pizza.
No, I do have that.
There you
It's in
go.
the kitchen.
So pleased.
Wild.
There's coffee stains
Exactly.
on the bottom, but it's there.
The third one would be independent contractors, because if you are deemed to have an independent contractor who's truly an employee, then that risks a fine, again, of that $63,000. And also, here's the stinger in the towel, back pay of entitlements. So if that independent contractor has been with you for 2 years, guess what? They've accrued 4 weeks of annual leave for each year. They've accrued 10 days of sick leave for each year and long service leave.
Wow.
So it's an important one. So make sure if you have any independent contractors.
Is there a like a holiday period, where 3 months someone comes on as a contractor and then they become an employee?
They've still
after
got to meet
that,
the
or-
criteria of a true independent contractor, and they've made it so it's a very multifaceted test. So things like, do they have their own business card or do they have your business card? If they look like they're your employee, that's not a good thing. If they use your equipment, that's not a good thing. If you're directing their work on a daily basis, that's not a good thing.
What's the difference between an independent contractor and someone working on a contract, though? Because people work on contracts, right? That's okay. Is that okay?
Well, that's probably an independent contractor. So
Like a 3-month contract.
Yeah, 3-month contract. Again, if it could
okay?
be, well, it depends whether they meet the test. So here's a great test.
If you
Here's
provide them all if you provide them what they got to do, their computer, their laptop, their business card, their phone,
they're starting to fail.
they're starting to look more like an employee.
Exactly.
If they use your work email address, they answer the phone in your work name,
Yeah.
not their independent contracting name.
If it looks to the public that like they're your employee, here's the biggest test of all, and this is what I learnt when I first started doing this. If that independent contractor is a test, here's a really good one, can't come to work one day and he can give the work to someone else without your permission and he works for you, he's an independent contractor.
Oh, I see.
So it's a multifaceted test. I would encourage people to get some
so the
advice on it.
independent contractor can contract someone else to do the work.
Correct.
Yeah.
Without your permission.
Without my permission. So most people that are working to help financial planners, like if we engage a marketing person to do something, that's a contract.
That could be a supplier arrangement.
That's more of and is that always contracted as well?
You should be under a supplier agreement, separate to an independent contractor or a permanent employee. That's when you supplied your services to someone.
Awesome. So, great tips. So, Natasha, thank you. How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, best way would be the website, employeematters.com.au or natashahawker.com. On the website at the moment, which might be of interest given we've talked about a lot of the legal stuff today, there is a little tool called Employee Metrics Mini. It's a short questionnaire. You can do it yourself and find out how you're tracking in terms of your HR levels of compliance, risk and best practice. And that will be a great indicator because I think a lot of business owners naive about what their exposure is, and they're probably exposed to fines and they just don't know it. It's not a deliberate contravention, but it's a contravention all the same.
And your book?
My book is called From Hire to Fire and Everything in Between. It's sold at Dimmicks or Amazon, and there's a PDF version that you can download from the website for about $4.95.
Boom.
And did you put something together for our XY guys, a download?
I hadn't, but I can. And what I think we might do is the How to Win the War for Talent, which is all the great questions to ask in an interview.
Okay.
So we'll
Awesome.
put those in the show notes.
Show notes. Awesome. Well, Natasha Hawker, thank you very
My
much.
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
A special shout out to Dean Colin Holmes for joining us.
Yes.
Dino.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.